I'm Patrick Mann. I'm the Director of Operations. So welcome to our next WestGrid Town Hall. A couple of admin things on the next slide. So, Aaron, the next slide there. Are you? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, okay, so yeah. Please send any questions to info@westgrid.ca, or you can put them up on the chat window in video if you're on video. And we'll be stopping at intervals to see about answering them. And of course, if you can mute yourself if you're not speaking, that would be good. The outline is on the next slide there. So you can see we got quite a few things to go over, and what I'll be doing is giving you a more high-level review, and then we'll get some of the site leads to give some details. Next slide is just a little quick reminder that here at WestGrid we're kind of trying to give you everything we've got up to today. Some of it's still up for grabs and is still being changed, some of the schedules, tech details, a lot of that kind of thing. So take it with a bit of a grain of salt. We're doing our best to give you the most up-to-date estimates. And one thing that I just heard a few minutes ago was that the U of A issue with Hungabee and Jasper, you'll see quite a lot of stuff about U of A and non-U of A users, but in fact U of A have just a couple of minutes ago have actually agreed to keep everybody on Jasper and Hungabee for another few months, so that was absolutely great news. But Camille, you don't know that. I don't know if you know that one yet, but just heard that. Yeah, so Camille will be giving some details around that, and I think we can still talk about how the migration is going to occur, but it might not happen. It might not be needed right now, like we were worrying about. Okay, so yeah, next slide. So I want to say dive right in here. The first thing I just want to note is that Compute Canada has been really busy with the Research Support National team on developing the user documentation. Still lots and lots of work to do, but there are now quite a few documents up there in docs.computecanada.ca, and in particular the migration pages are up there. Again, as we go along, there are still changes, but it's not really nice to see that kind of thing up there. So I'd really recommend that users start to have a look at those, start to read them, and you'll see most of what I'm about to what we're going to talk about today up in these pages. And then of course the WestGrid pages are updated to reflect that kind of thing as well. Yeah, and I just put a brief screenshot of the docs migration page, and you'll notice things like the allocation schedule, defunding schedule, pages for the new systems, recommendations, the silo migration guide, FAQs, some stuff about the Jasper Hungabee migration, which after the stuff we just learned this morning will have to be updated a bit, but it's quite a lot is there, and I say well worthwhile reading. Yeah, and so off to the first thing, which is an update on how the whole cyber infrastructure, new national systems things are going. So on the compute line, one thing you'll notice right away is we actually have names for them. UVic is called Arbutus. The SFU system, GP2, is called Cedar. And GP3 at Waterloo is called Graham. And it's nice to see those names actually appearing, so we can start putting them into the documentation and start doing the URLs for those guys. The good news is that Arbutus, that's GP1 at UVic, the cloud, is up and running, and Ryan from the cloud guys will have a bit more to say that in a few slides. Cedar at GP2, the purchase order is pretty imminent there. We're just waiting for that to go out. So kind of hoping, we're expecting April. That's in time for the rack allocations, April 1st. We're kind of hoping to get it up a bit earlier than that, February or maybe March. Graham, that's GP3 in Waterloo, following in behind, still a bit under review there, but we're hoping that they also will be available early April. And a couple of detailed things, the network RFP is out there. They've been doing some vendor testing. In fact, I think there was a trip to China to go to vendor labs, for instance, and we're expecting to have all that in, again, before April, before Cedar and Graham get going. Similar comments for the parallel file system and the scheduler. Valuations are ongoing, and they have to be in time for the big machines to be there. And then just to remind you that there's still that very large parallel machine called Niagara in Toronto. Still early discussion stages, but that's going to be a pretty nice big machine. Next slide there. Yeah, the storage end of things. I think we got somebody who's not muted. Okay, good, thanks. Yep. The NDC is the National Data Cyber Infrastructure. So that's the official name for what is essentially the silo replacement. There are two locations at SFU and Waterloo, calling them NDC-SFU and NDC-Waterloo. Both of them have received the SBBs. Those are the storage building blocks. They're essentially white boxes, have tons of drives and a couple of servers in the front end. At the moment, the silo interim space, and that's for the silo move in Waterloo, is available, and migration has started. So that's great news, and again, Sergey will be able to fill us in a little more in a couple of slides. SFU, we're expecting that they've received all the building blocks. We're expecting to have SFU available anytime now. The actual NDC itself, and there are lots of details to come, should be, again, we're all aiming for that April 2017 rack date, and if we can do it, get it in much earlier than that so people can start migrating storage there. And the object storage still going strong. Yeah, kind of hoping for April. That date is definitely under discussion because it's turning out that DDN-WAS system is taking quite a lot of understanding and training before we're comfortable with getting it up and running. So yeah, aiming for April, but to get it up, but it'll probably be close to mid-2017 or something. And then the clusters themselves have attached high-performance scratch storage, and again, that's supposed to be here in time for the clusters to get out, to be brought up, because of course you can't run a cluster without the attached storage. So, so there's a really quick update. Then further on the cluster decommissioning, so the one that I just mentioned earlier, Hungabee Jasper, that has been extended now to March 31st. So that's great news. Victoria, there's some interesting things going on with Hermes, and we'll hear a bit more about that from Ryan. The Calgary systems, no change there. It's going until 2018. Parallel will. Vancouver, Orsonus is extended to March 31st, 2018. We really needed some of these resources as we're waiting for things like the large parallel machine to come on. But with Orsonus, we've taken a little bit of a risk here in that Orsonus, thanks to UBC contributions, is going to continue, but we're not going to put it on any kind of support contract. There are some good reasons for that. Some of the basic controllers are in fact pretty new. They've already been replaced, and there's some redundancy built into the system, so we could lose a controller and still keep the system going. So we're going to try to keep Orsonus going, but the cautionary note there was that if there's absolutely critical data, it should be going on the national data cyber infrastructure, where copies made as backup stuff. Grex, still working on, in fact, replacing the very old storage system there. It really was too much of a risk just to keep it going all by itself, but it's supposed to be going until March 31st. And then Bugaboo, we have a plan to keep Bugaboo going as well up until March 31st, 2018. So fundamentally, we're trying to keep as many of our machines going all next year and allocated. But of course, they are getting old. We think we can do it, but we certainly don't want to keep them going much beyond that. But of course, at the end of next year or into 2018, all the new systems should be up and running, and then we can gradually over next year start to move people onto all the new systems. There are lots and lots of details about the other systems in Compute Canada. I've just talked about WestGrid here, but if you want to see all the other decommissioning details, they're on the Compute Canada website. Right. Okay, now at that point, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan Enge. He's the WestGrid site lead at the University of Victoria. And remember, that's where the GP1 cloud, Arbutus, is. And
Maybe
he can also
first, Patrick,
talk about...
do you want to see if there's any questions?
Yes, I was just about to say that. Yeah, okay, good. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and just before we go there, any questions? Have we got anything coming in on the quick overview of the whole works? Looks good. Yeah, okay, and as you can see in the town hall, we'll have these stops here and there where we introduce a new speaker, and that's a good place to answer questions. Okay, Ryan, over to you then.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ryan Enge. I'm the site lead at UVic, and also a member of the GP1 cloud team, now known as Arbutus. So just a quick high-level overview of the cloud within Compute Canada. So there's two sites. We have the West Cloud and the East Cloud. UVic, of course, is the West Cloud, and the East Cloud is at Sherbrooke. So at the end of August, we received our GP1 nodes, so that was around 7,000 cores that we received. They went into production about 2 weeks later, mostly into production about 2 weeks later, and are being used now. So the nodes range from 128 gigs of memory to up to 512 gigs of memory. We have some specific purposes. The ones with the higher memory are targeted towards the persistent types of computing that the users are requesting, like web portals and just some interactive work that people may want to do. I just also wanted to mention that because each of the nodes, new nodes, have 4 900 gig SAS hard drives in a RAID 5, which gives about 2.5 terabytes of local storage for ephemeral images for OpenStack. The interconnect for the cloud is 10 gigabit Ethernet. And we also got 2 GPU nodes as part of this first phase of purchasing, which have 2 Tesla K80s in each node. And so we'll be playing around with those and seeing how they fit into the cloud and how people can leverage that. And it'll also give, for example, people that are running Windows that require GPU access to GPUs within Compute Canada as well. I also just wanted to quickly mention, just before we move on to the next one, is the storage. We currently have about 200 terabytes of Ceph storage, which is used for volume, so that's persistent storage in the cloud. This is going to be increased to somewhere around 600 to 700 terabytes of storage over the next few months, hopefully sooner than that. And it's targeted for sort of high performance local POSIX storage. So if you have large storage requirements, that's more targeted towards our national object store that Patrick mentioned earlier. Okay, so on to the next slide. So for the rack, last year we did have some RPPs allocated to the cloud, but we had significantly fewer resources. So this year we're expecting some very interesting proposals for using the cloud. I've seen some preliminary stuff coming out, and it looks like there's some pretty demanding requests. So hopefully we can satisfy them all. So the RPPs are due today, as is mentioned there, and we also have what's called the Rapid Access Service. So that's sort of the default allocation. So anyone within Compute Canada can request access to the cloud, and you'll get a default allocation. There's a link there at the bottom to request an account. And so you get some fairly limited CPU and memory. So it's 15 gigs of memory, which isn't listed on there. But we do have some flexibility in there to increase that slightly for people outside of the rack process. So just be aware of that. Okay, on to the next slide. So just a quick talk about the Hermes cluster. So we had all these resources that are sitting there, and we have a bunch of legacy resources that are sucking up a lot of power. And so to free up some of that power and to make use of these resources, because they're not going to be allocated by the rack RPP process until April, we decided that we would virtualize the Hermes cluster. So it had a bonded gigabit Ethernet interconnect, and the jobs were meant to mostly run on single nodes. So it was a good fit for the cloud. So we initially did a proof of concept about 1.5 years ago, and we actually had a cloud instance running as part of Hermes, and people were running their jobs there without even knowing it for the last 1.5 years. So we've just expanded that now to include all the cores of Hermes, and so the actual physical Hermes nodes have now been shut off to save power. So yeah, that's about it for that. And then once Hermes is decommissioned sometime around the end of March next year, then we'll be, the users will likely be moving to GP2 or GP3. So that's it for me. So if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yep. Any questions then for Ryan about the cloud end of things? Yeah, good. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, the UVic end has really been motoring on ahead, so it's great to hear that. And some of these really interesting things about thinking about high-performance computing in the cloud, as in this prototype approach with Hermes. So, I think that's kind of cool, and we're really looking forward to seeing how the performance is and what we can do with all that.
So, just a note about when Hermes is decommissioned, that we'll be sending out information to users, closer to that time, just with more specific details and instructions and support around that.
Yeah, quite right, Aaron, and of course that's for all the decommissioned systems that start decommissioning at the end of March, and then the ones that keep going will have some time to move users next year. Okay, cool. So I think that's it for there.
Patrick, there is one question in the group chat, and Grigory Shamov is asking, is Windows VMs possible on the UVic cloud?
I think the answer is probably yes, but Ryan, do you want to give a more in-depth answer?
Yeah, definitely. We have people using Windows VMs currently. There is an issue around licensing. So it's not clear at this time if Compute Canada will be providing some certain amount of licenses, or so basically right now it's bring your own Windows license, but we are working through a process to try to get Windows licenses for the cloud.
Thanks, Ryan. Will there be in the future long-term allocations for the cloud from Falk Herwig? Yeah, the answer is yes, and that's the RPP program through Compute Canada, where one can ask up to 3 years.
And it's my understanding that 2018, the RGG will also be multi-year. So if you're asking through that other program.
Okay, in that case, on to Camille, who on a few minutes' notice has to say slightly different things from what the slides are saying. So Camille, off to you on that line.
Well, I'm happy to announce that Jasper and Hungabee will still be available to researchers from the U of A and not from the U of A until March 31st of 2017. So that's great. We don't have to move everybody so quickly. We have support for, so the U of A has purchased or will purchase support for the storage system. Unfortunately, paying for support for Hungabee and Jasper, the actual compute portions is extremely expensive. It's actually probably more expensive than it would cost to replace those machines. So the only parts that are being supported hardware-wise are the parts that run the whole cluster. What this means is that Hungabee and Jasper can shrink, get smaller as pieces die. Also, that outages are going to take longer as we basically replace parts of Jasper with scavenged parts and so on. So, however, this does mean that we will still be able to use these resources, which is quite expensive for researchers. Researchers will be able to use them for quite a while from now.
Yeah, so Camille, do you want to, I mean, these kinds of recommendations up on the slide now, probably we're going to have to move anyhow, so we're kind of ahead of the game in a sense, but you might want to just review, even though the December 15th deadline is now not necessary, at least trying to get going would be good. So
yeah. So basically so the deadline now is March 31st. If you have data on Jasper or Hungabee and are a non-UofA user, you will have to move it in advance of that, and we recommend at least 2 weeks because everybody will be trying to move their data at the same time. So you should be starting to do that around March 15th. Some recommendations on systems that you can use. Well, if you're a serial user, you use less than 2 gigabytes of RAM per core, single core jobs, especially if they're short. They will run everywhere. Basically, every single resource in Compute Canada and WestGrid will like that type of jobs. If you require whole nodes, Hermes, Grex, and Arbutus, and GP2 and 3 are going to be good for you. If you have big parallel jobs, Arbutus, parallel, GP2 and 3 are what you should look at. If you require higher memory per core jobs, such as 4 gigabytes per core, you're going to be looking at the Grex or GP2. Please be understanding of the fact that if you have a large amount of storage as well, if you're using more than a terabyte of storage space, you should ask where you're going to move to. If you have an iterative workflow, so if you run a job, want to get the result, and then based upon that job's result, run another job, you're going to want to look at clusters that have a short maximum wall time. So in WestGrid, those are Nestor, Hermes, and Parallel. As well, Hungabee users, there's going to be 2 systems available. For Hungabee users, there's a system at CAC, Center for Advanced Computing, that they were willing to share with Hungabee users as well as the new systems with GP2 and 3. They will have big fat nodes with 2 terabytes of RAM. If your jobs require more than 2 terabytes of RAM, then you need to speak with us, especially if you're a non-UofA user.
GP2 will have a couple of 3 terabytes.
Yeah. But if you require more than that, and you're not a UofA user, you should speak with us.
Yeah, Camille, yeah, it's of course probably a good recommendation generally is now that Hungabee and Jasper are keeping going until hopefully end of March, well, until end of March. Hopefully by that time GP2 and GP3 will be available, and one can then move to those guys almost right away, and that would probably be the recommended move, I think. We're kind of flying by the seats of our pants here, because of this new announcement as of this morning.
And thanks, Camille, for changing your presentation in the final hour. You did a good job. And also thanks to the U of A. It is not cheap in terms of power, cooling, people time, and support to be able to keep these systems going because there are delays elsewhere down the pipe. So thank you, and I think the users will be very appreciative of all your efforts.
And of course, thanks to all the sites who have kept their systems going. Yeah, exactly. This is kind of brilliant and has saved us from a lot of grief, I think. Cool. Okay, any other questions then? Okay, over to Sergey, who will bring us up to date a bit on the silo migration.
Hi, everybody. Sergey Stepanenko, site lead at UofS. So as of November 16th, silo migration started, and first available site to migrate data is University of Waterloo, and we will be moving large users that have large rack allocations to Waterloo. Those users are contacted individually with information about time frame and technical details of the migration. The second site will be Simon Fraser University, and migration to SFU will begin as soon as it's available. So what this migration represents is essentially moving data from silo to new storage platform, which is not final design of the storage, but rather interim solution that represents oversimplified storage platform that only designed to hold a certain amount of data from silo. And second, migration might be necessary in the future. That is to be determined during usage of new storage and based on utilization and based on performance metrics that we will be collecting along the way. So the biggest difference between silo and new storage where data is being migrated is that silo used WestGrid username and password schema, and new storage will use national LDAP Compute Canada username and password. In many cases, Compute Canada name and WestGrid name are the same, but in several cases they might be different. So I recommend everyone to check Compute Canada name and password by logging into CCDB with name, not email address that specified during registration, but Compute Canada name and password. And if there's any issues arise during this process, they can be resolved by opening service requests with support at computecanada.ca. Another point is, unlike on silo, where only specific file systems were backed up to tape, new storage will back up everything to tape. So next slide, please. So yeah, I already covered the temporary nature of this storage, and that future migration might be required. Silo will be kept operational until end of March 2017. We extended support for the silo with DDN in order to migrate data in time and fully, which we hoped to achieve before December, but it is no longer an option. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and I'll just note thanks again to University of Saskatchewan for stepping up to the plate here and keeping and helping us keep silo going. Absolutely necessary.
So currently, we determine that there's two different types of storage will be available in the future. And it is very important to understand the difference between those. So each compute system that Compute Canada rolls in 2017, being University of Waterloo or Simon Fraser University or University of Toronto, those big compute clusters will have their own storage systems, which will refer as a scratch and it attached to the cluster. It's a high-performance storage that will have its own set of allocations, its own set of rules, and lifetime of data. The second type of storage we will refer as national data cyber infrastructure, and it will cover storage that not directly associated with a cluster, but rather associated with infrastructure available to all users, including clusters. Either it's University of Waterloo or Simon Fraser or any other university that hosts new systems. So there is a little disconnect between this model and what is described in resource allocation glossary or being referred in resource allocation forms. But the core team of Compute Canada people that working with the technical reviews and working with storage, they understand the difference and they understand the reality of the model that's being built. So I recommend everyone who has any problems with fuzziness of definitions or ambiguity of terms, or have questions about what storage types will be needed for this or that type of work, please send us in request to support at Compute Canada or WestGrid, and we will be happy to answer to those questions. So, national data cyber infrastructure will hold, as this is working set up today, so it will hold 3 types of file systems or storage components. So project file system will be available to clusters in hosting institutions, SFU, Waterloo, Toronto. And project is a large capacity, 10 petabyte total capacity in each site of disk space. Meaning it's online disk storage where data is backed up to tape, subject to resource allocation, and accessible by users from outside of the cluster or from the cluster through interactive nodes or compute nodes. Nearline is storage that eventually will be tape only. So the file system designed to move data located in a nearline file system to tape and store it there for a long duration of time, but this data becomes unavailable online and only available on demand. So to move data from tape to disk, request is required, and it will be done only by request, not automatically. It's subject to resource allocations, and it's planned to replicate nearline between sites. So each site will have identical copy of nearline data. And the last one is object store, which is not a file system and rather a storage platform that currently has only purpose of serving several special projects. And our future application for object store is to be decided. It's also subject to resource allocation. It's the smallest storage allocation of all, and it will be available on all sites. The access to object store will be through different protocols, mainly S3 Swift, but also POSIX file access will be available. So now, if we look at those file systems, data that we currently hold on Silo most likely end up in project category. So project file system will be logically new space where all Silo data end up. Not necessarily 100%, because some of the data that Silo currently holds doesn't belong on online storage, because it is deep archive data that nobody accesses for a long time. So maybe some of the some portion of the data from Silo will eventually end up at Nearline. And of course, there's a possibility that some portion of the data from Silo will move to Object Store. Next slide. Questions?
Patrick, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Sergey. Yeah, I was just going to say that that it's really nice to see all this coming together, and we got some understanding of what the services that Compute Canada are going to be providing actually look like. So this is cool stuff.
If I may add at the end, so currently, due to migration data from Silo, we already issued special provisions for Silo that performance will be degraded. And I ask for understanding from our users that at this point our goal shifted from serving as many customers as possible to moving data as fast as possible. Therefore, performance on Silo will degrade ever further. And we suspect that all resources that we have available will be dedicated to transfer processes. That might cause long response time to user request. We might not have enough cycles to run any substantial programs on Silo nodes like tar or gzip or anything like rsync. That being said, we still keep Silo accessible by all users, but we'll do our best to maintain priorities between migration and serving users.
Yeah, very good point, Sergey. Yeah, it's trying to get all this data moved over, which will take upwards of a few months. It means that we have to move resources over to the actual transfer itself. Yeah, so a good cautionary note, definitely. But it will be great to get it all going. I think one other thing that's kind of neat is that that we're now talking small means only a couple of petabytes. But that's, you know, progress marches on. We're really using a ton of data these days, or you guys are using a ton of data these days. Okay, thanks, Sergey. No other questions there? Okay, just a couple of final slides then. Just to note the resource allocation, the RRG and RPP competitions are due today. Hope everybody's got their proposals ready to go and almost submitted. And just to quickly review, so the RPP progress report for existing RPPs, that'll open in the next couple of weeks, I think, and you can submit your progress reports there. For next year's RRG and RPPs, the scientific and technical reviews will take place over Christmas. So I was just talking to Eduardo this morning in our meeting, and he's gearing up to get all the spreadsheets out and to start allocating these the proposals to the scientific and technical reviewers. A key date is February 6th and 7th. When the chairs of the scientific review committees and the and myself and a couple of other from the technical reviewers will be meeting together for the big face-to-face meeting, where we look at all the scientific reviews and do all the ratings and such, and see what we can do about the allocations. So we're expecting then then of course have to go through board approval, that kind of thing. So about a month later, the allocation letters should go to users. So allocation letters should be going out March 9th, and then implementation of the allocations in early April. So that's moving ahead fast. And I think, yeah, the last I heard, we had about 330 RRGs submitted, or started anyhow. Of course, in the nature of things, everybody's submitting right now. So we'll see how many we get and be able to update people probably next week as to how many we've actually got. So well over 300 anyhow, I would guess. So quite a lot of these that we're going to have to work through under the new systems as well. And I think, was it Sergey who mentioned that because this is all new systems with new new processes with new words like RRG and some issues, because we had to put together that glossary of what we're actually going to get well before we knew anything about what we were going to get. It was back in August when some of the RAC documentation was created. There are inconsistencies, there are some issues, and we've created a pretty huge technical review document for the technical reviewers, and it's us local folks, like guys like Sergey, Ryan, Camille, who will be going through all these proposals for their technical requirements, and that's the place where we're going to be trying to address any confusion that seems to have occurred. So we've got a way of doing that. We'll all be sensitized to some of the issues that might happen, and we'll do our best to work back with users, with proposers, if there are any issues. So lots of stuff going on with that. Yeah, next slide. The comms team, the WestGrid comms team, have been doing some WestGrid updates. I don't know if you've seen some of that, but just quickly, there's a couple of quick links to the Compute Canada database and the Compute Canada documentation, so you can get to those really quickly now, and some extra bits about the national systems, and that's the info that we've just been discussing today, things like the migration, the rapid access service, that kind of thing. So there are quick links right on the website, on the WestGrid homepage to get to those. And one further thing, we have our system status page, and in addition there's a black status light which will indicate a system that's going to be defunded, and we'll start to get some information up there and links, as you can see in the screenshot, that tell you where to go and some of the plans around these defunded systems.
So Patrick, just briefly interject to give a definition of defunded. So that means it's taken off of our grant, the MSI. If the institutions own the infrastructure, so at that point, it is up to them to choose how to use it. They may still open it up to people. They may just use it for their institution. Not clear, but now it's no longer part of a nationally supported infrastructure beyond the defunded stage.
Yeah, good point. Yep. Yeah, so we'll learn more about those, and of course, if you are at an institution where there is one of these defunded systems, you might want to talk to your institutional IT services to see if there are any plans for continuation. Right, next slide. Yeah, training sessions. So WestGrid, of course, has our usual training sessions going on, and we always end these town halls with a quick overview. You can see the topics there. Yeah, what have we got? Bioinformatics, some introductions to WestGrid, visualization, OpenMP, and some of the digital humanities tools. So that's nice to see. The digital humanities end of things is going along very well, and is very active. So the new stuff for us to learn about that. Right, questions? Yeah. Let's see, we got one question. I have a project that uses the WestCloud machines. My project name is AppCrawler, and I'm asking how is my project going to be impacted by the migration. So if it's on West Cloud, there shouldn't be any impact whatsoever. West Cloud is not being defunded. In fact, West Cloud was that GP1 that has been expanded. So should be fine, subject to, of course, resource allocation. Right, other questions?
So I had a question, Patrick. So GP, the storage, the temporary storage at Waterloo is available. Does that mean it's available to any user, or it's just for the migration process right now?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. Right now, it's available. It's for the silo migration process, so it's available to silo users.
Do we have any idea of when users can start accessing these?
The non-silo users, well, that would be April when the whole NDC comes up.
And then silo users can start accessing it as soon as their data is migrated there.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, good point. Of course, I think as we've talked about in previous WestGrid town halls, the silo migration is going in blocks. So Sergey turns off access to the block, moves the block, and then the data is now on the temporary Waterloo system for now. And at that point, you can get access to it by doing the usual SSHs or whatever you want into the Waterloo system. Yeah, we didn't go over that again in this town hall, but you can see the details on the docs wiki. Yeah, cool. Okay, well, I think that's about it then. As noted, you can send questions to support@westgrid.ca. If you got anything further to follow up, please do so. Remember the...
Sorry, do you have any suggestions for the next town hall of topics, which we'll have in maybe not exactly a month's time, but
probably not exactly a month's time, yeah.
Then please send those along so that we can plan accordingly.
Yeah, we work all the time, Lindsay, of course. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyhow, sometime in January, yeah, I think we'll have another town hall, and of course, I think there are going to be a whole bunch of new things happening in January, because we'll have a lot more information about the purchase orders, exactly what we've ordered, all that kind of thing. So it should be going to be an exciting time. Right. Well, thanks everybody, and yeah, see you in January. Cool, and thanks to all the site leads for presenting. That's it.